The night was heavy with rain, the kind that poured endlessly, drumming against the metal roofs and drowning the distant echoes of the city beyond Ravensbrück station. The clock above the empty ticket counter flickered erratically, the neon glow reflecting against the puddles on the cracked floor. It was almost midnight, and the station was supposed to be deserted, except for the man standing on platform 6, waiting for a train that wasn't supposed to come. Edgar Mills had taken shelter in the station after his car broke down a few miles away. He had heard stories about Ravensbrück, tales whispered in hushed voices about the abandoned station and the ghostly train that sometimes arrived past midnight. At first, he scoffed at the stories, but as he stood alone on the platform, his unease grew. The wind howled through the broken windows, sending a cold shiver down his spine. The flickering overhead lights barely illuminated the platform, casting elongated shadows that seemed to move on their own. He could hear the distant sound of train whistles, faint, distorted, and oddly mournful. The air smelled of rust, mildew, and something faintly metallic. Then he heard it, the low guttural sound of a train engine approaching. His pulse quickened. He turned towards the tracks, expecting to see the gleaming headlights of an approaching train. Instead, he saw only darkness, stretching into the unknown. Yet the sound grew louder, and with it came the rhythmic clatter of wheels on rails. The platform trembled slightly under his feet, and then, out of the dense fog, the train emerged. It was an old locomotive, blackened with age, its exterior covered in grime and soot. Its windows were dark, reflecting nothing but the flickering lights above. It slowed down as it approached, and with a hiss of steam, it came to a stop in front of him. The doors creaked open, revealing a dimly lit interior. Edgar hesitated. No passengers disembarked. The train was empty. A chill ran down his spine, but the thought of spending the night in the station was worse. He stepped inside. The interior was unlike any train he had ever seen. The seats were old-fashioned, upholstered in deep red velvet, but they were worn and covered in dust. The overhead luggage compartments were rusted, and an eerie silence filled the cabin. The air was thick with the scent of damp wood and something else, something rotten. The doors hissed shut behind him. The train jolted forward, and Edgar stumbled into a seat. The rain continued to pour outside, blurring the view through the windows. He glanced around. There was no conductor, no passengers. Nothing but the unsettling hum of the train as it rumbled down the tracks. Minutes passed, then an hour. The train showed no sign of stopping. He checked his phone, no signal. He tried to move to another car, but the doors refused to budge as if welded shut. Panic set in. He slammed his fists against the windows. But the outside world was nothing but an endless stretch of darkness, occasionally interrupted by flashes of lightning that illuminated desolate landscapes he didn't recognize. Then the whispers began, soft at first, like the wind slipping through cracks in the walls. Then they grew louder, unintelligible, yet urgent. Edgar spun around, searching for the source, but the train remained empty. A sound like fabric brushing against fabric came from the end of the car. He turned slowly. A figure stood there, half shrouded in shadow. It was tall and thin, its face obscured by a veil of darkness. Its clothes were tattered, hanging off its frame like remnants of another time. And its eyes, too hollow, glowing voids bore into him with an intensity that made his blood freeze. He couldn't move, he couldn't breathe. The whispers turned into a chorus of distorted voices, all murmuring his name. Then the lights went out. The train screamed through the night, and Edgar Mills was never seen again. The storm raged over Black Hollow Station, hammering the roof with relentless sheets of rain. Lightning split the sky, casting eerie shadows across the deserted platform. It was well past midnight, and the last scheduled train had departed hours ago. Yet, the station wasn't empty. Harold Green, the lone signalman on duty, sat in his dimly lit office, staring at the rain-slicked tracks. The station had been abandoned for years, but he had been assigned to monitor it for reasons he didn't understand. Officially, it was for maintenance purposes, but the unspoken truth among railway workers was different. No one wanted to be here after dark. The legends told of a ghost train, a spectral locomotive that tore through the station at 1:13 a.m., carrying lost souls to destinations unknown. Most dismissed the tale as nonsense, but Harold wasn't so sure. His predecessor had vanished one stormy night, leaving behind only a shattered lantern and a journal filled with ramblings about voices in the rain. Thunder roared as the clock struck 1:13. Harold's breath hitched as he heard it, the distant haunting sound of a train whistle. The sound grew closer, accompanied by the rhythmic churning of wheels on metal rails. He rushed to the platform, lantern in hand, his pulse hammering in his ears. The train materialized from the darkness, an enormous black locomotive with no visible conductor. Its windows were fogged, but he swore he saw movement inside, shadows shifting, pressing against the glass. The train slowed, stopping perfectly in front of him. Steam hissed from its undercarriage. The door creaked open. Against every instinct screaming at him to run, Harold stepped forward. A gust of freezing air blasted from within, carrying the scent of old decay and something metallic blood. He peered inside, and his stomach twisted. The interior was a nightmare. The walls pulsed as if alive, veins of rust and mold crawling across the metal. The seats were torn, soaked in what looked like blackened ichor, and the passengers, if they could be called that, sat in eerie silence. Figures draped in tattered clothes, their hollow eyes fixed ahead. Some were barely more than skeletons, others frozen in expressions of eternal terror. Harold turned to flee, but a cold hand clamped onto his wrist. A woman, or what had once been one, stared up at him. Her skin was gray, stretched tight over her bones, her lips moving without sound. But he understood the message. "Don't board." The train let out a ghastly shriek, and the hand vanished. The doors slammed shut, and the locomotive lurched forward. Harold staggered back, watching as the train disappeared into the rain, its whistle fading into the night. The next morning, the railway supervisors found Harold Green lying on the platform, unconscious, his hair turned stark white. He never spoke of what happened, but he left a note scrawled on a damp scrap of paper. "Never wait for the 1:13.